Marcus Thompson had always been drawn to shiny objects. As a child, he collected bottle caps, coins, and anything that caught the light just right. Now at 28, working as a janitor at the National Guard Armory in downtown Phoenix, that same fascination had evolved into something more dangerous. Every Tuesday and Thursday evening, Marcus would clean the administrative offices after the day shift ended. The building would fall silent except for the hum of fluorescent lights and his cartwheels squeaking down the polished hallways. It was during these quiet hours that he first noticed them, the display cases lining the main corridor, filled with military decorations, ribbons, and medals that seemed to glow under the harsh lighting. The cases contained decades of military history. Bronze stars, Purple Hearts, combat action ribbons, and dozens of other medals told stories of courage, sacrifice, and honor. Marcus found himself stopping longer each night, studying the intricate details of each decoration. He would press his nose against the glass, imagining what it would feel like to hold such prestigious symbols in his hands. His obsession began innocently enough. Marcus started researching military medals online, learning about their significance and monetary value. He discovered that some rare decorations could sell for hundreds, even thousands of dollars on collector websites. The knowledge planted a seed in his mind that grew stronger with each passing shift. Marcus had been struggling financially for months. His girlfriend Sarah had left him 3 weeks earlier, taking most of their shared belongings and leaving him with rent he couldn't afford alone. His mother's medical bills were piling up, and his part-time job at the armory barely covered his basic expenses. The medals began to represent more than just shiny objects. They looked like a solution to his mounting problems. The security at the armory was minimal during evening hours. One aging guard, Officer Williams, patrolled the building every 2 hours, spending most of his time in the security office watching television or reading newspapers. The display cases were locked, but Marcus had noticed that some of the older ones had worn latches that didn't seem particularly secure. One Thursday night in late September, Marcus found himself standing before the largest display case, staring at a particularly beautiful silver star that caught the overhead light perfectly. He had researched this specific medal and knew it could be worth over $800 to the right collector. His hand unconsciously reached toward the glass, and he noticed his reflection staring back at him, a tired man with desperate eyes. The building was especially quiet that night. Officer Williams had called in sick, leaving only the automated security system that Marcus had learned to navigate around during his months of employment. The opportunity felt like fate presenting itself on a silver platter. His financial desperation began to override his moral compass as he stood there, weighing his options. Marcus returned to his supply closet and retrieved a small screwdriver from his toolkit. His heart pounded as he walked back to the display case, looking over his shoulder every few seconds to ensure he remained alone. The medal seemed to call to him, promising relief from his crushing debt and a chance to start fresh. As he approached the case, Marcus told himself this would be just once, one medal to solve his immediate problems, and then he would never touch anything again. He convinced himself that these decorations were just sitting there collecting dust anyway, that no one would miss a single piece from such an extensive collection. The rationalization felt weak even to him, but desperation has a way of making bad ideas seem reasonable. Standing before the case with the screwdriver in his trembling hand, Marcus took one final look around the empty hallway. The silence felt heavy, almost oppressive, as if the building itself was holding its breath. He had no idea that his next action would set in motion a series of events that would change not only his life, but the lives of several others in ways he never could have imagined. The screwdriver slipped into the gap between the case frame and glass easier than Marcus had expected. With gentle pressure and careful maneuvering, the old latch gave way with a soft click that seemed to echo through the entire hallway. His hands were shaking so badly that he had to steady himself against the wall before reaching inside. The silver star felt heavier than he had imagined, its metal cold against his palm. The ribbon attached to it was faded but still intact, and Marcus could see tiny scratches on the surface that spoke of its age and history. For a moment he hesitated, realizing that this medal had belonged to someone who had risked their life for their country, but the weight of his unpaid bills felt heavier than the medal itself. Marcus quickly closed the case and pocketed the decoration, his heart racing as he resumed his cleaning duties. Every sound in the building seemed amplified. The hum of the air conditioning, the distant tick of a wall clock, Even his own breathing felt unnaturally loud. He finished his shift mechanically, going through the motions of emptying trash cans and mopping floors while the stolen metal burned like a guilty secret in his pocket. The next morning, Marcus called in sick to work, unable to face returning to the scene of his crime so soon. He spent the day researching online marketplaces where he could sell the metal anonymously. The process was more complicated than he had anticipated. Legitimate collectors wanted documentation and provenance, while shadier buyers offered much less money than he had hoped for. After 3 days of searching, Marcus found a collector in Las Vegas who asked few questions and offered $600 for the silver star. The transaction would happen through an encrypted messaging app, and payment would come via cryptocurrency to avoid any paper trail. Marcus felt sick to his stomach as he arranged the sale, but his landlord's eviction notice taped to his door served as a constant reminder of why he needed the money. The package went out on Monday morning, and by Wednesday evening, Marcus had received his payment. The $600 would buy him another month in his apartment and put a small dent in his mother's medical bills, but it wouldn't solve his long-term problems. As he stared at his bank account balance, Marcus realized with growing dread that one theft had only provided temporary relief. The following week, he returned to work as if nothing had happened. Officer Williams was back from his sick leave, and the building fell back into its normal routine. Marcus waited nervously for someone to notice the missing metal, but days passed without any alarm being raised. The display cases contained so many decorations that one missing piece wasn't immediately obvious. This lack of reaction emboldened Marcus in a way he hadn't expected. If no one noticed one missing metal, perhaps they wouldn't notice another. The thought crept into his mind during quiet moments at work, growing stronger each time he passed the display cases. His financial situation remained desperate, and the easy money from his first theft seemed like a viable solution to his ongoing problems. 3 weeks after his first theft, Marcus found himself standing before a different display case, studying a purple heart that gleamed under the corridor lights. This metal was worth even more than the silver star, and he had already identified a potential buyer through his previous transaction. The security remained lax. Officer Williams still followed his predictable patrol schedule, and Marcus had grown more confident in his ability to avoid detection. The second theft went even smoother than the first. Marcus had refined his technique, bringing a small flashlight to better see the latch mechanism and wearing thin gloves to avoid leaving fingerprints. The Purple Heart joined the first metal in his collection of guilt and desperation, and within a week, it too had been sold to a collector who asked no uncomfortable questions. But success bred overconfidence, and overconfidence would prove to be Marcus's downfall. Each successful theft made the next one seem easier and less risky. He began to see the metals not as symbols of honor and sacrifice, but as inventory, waiting to be liquidated. The moral weight of his actions faded as the practical benefits mounted, and Marcus started planning his third theft before the second metal had even left his apartment. What he didn't know was that Sergeant Michael Rodriguez, a decorated veteran who volunteered at the armory on weekends, had begun to notice subtle changes in the display cases. Rodriguez had an eye for detail that came from years of military service, and something about the arrangement of metals was starting to look different to him. He hadn't yet connected the changes to theft, but his growing suspicions would soon lead to consequences that Marcus never saw coming. Sergeant Michael Rodriguez had spent every Saturday morning at the armory for the past 2 years, volunteering his time to help organize military records and maintain the memorial displays. At 53, the retired Army veteran walked with a slight limp from shrapnel that had torn through his left leg during his third deployment to Afghanistan, but his mind remained sharp and his attention to detail impeccable. On a crisp October morning, Rodriguez was polishing the display case glass when something caught his eye. The arrangement of metals in the main corridor looked slightly different than he remembered. Having organized these displays himself, he knew their layout by heart. The bronze star that had been positioned next to the silver star was now sitting where the silver star should have been, as if someone had moved things around to fill an empty space. Rodriguez pulled out his phone and scrolled through photos he had taken months earlier to document the displays for a historical newsletter. Comparing the images to what he saw before him, his suspicions were confirmed. The silver star was missing, and other metals had been rearranged to hide the gap. His stomach tightened as he realized what this meant. The veteran immediately sought out Captain Jennifer Hayes, the weekend duty officer. Hayes was a sharp woman in her early 40s who had earned her rank through decisive action and attention to detail. When Rodriguez explained his concerns, she listened intently before accompanying him to examine the display cases personally. Together, they conducted a thorough inventory of all 5 display cases in the corridor. Their systematic check revealed that 3 medals were definitely missing: the Silver Star, a Purple Heart, and a Combat Action Ribbon. The theft pattern suggested someone with regular access to the building who understood the security schedule well, enough to avoid detection for weeks. Captain Hayes immediately initiated the Armory's security protocols. She contacted the base commander, filed an official incident report, and requested access to the building's security camera footage from the past month. The implications of the theft went far beyond the monetary value of the medals. These decorations represented the honor and sacrifice of American service members, making their theft a deeply personal violation for everyone involved. The security office contained weeks of digital footage stored on hard drives. Hayes and Rodriguez spent hours reviewing recordings, focusing on evening and weekend hours when the building had minimal supervision. The cameras covered most hallways, but had blind spots near some of the display cases, a security flaw that would need to be addressed once the current crisis was resolved. After reviewing dozens of hours of footage, they found what they were looking for. The cameras showed Marcus Thompson, easily identifiable by his janitorial uniform and access badge, lingering near the display cases for unusually long periods during his evening shifts. While they couldn't see the actual theft due to camera angles, they captured him examining the cases closely and returning to them repeatedly over several weeks. The footage also revealed Marcus's suspicious behavior immediately after the estimated theft dates. He appeared nervous and jumpy, constantly looking over his shoulder and avoiding the memorial corridor entirely during some shifts. His body language screamed guilt to the trained eyes of the 2 military veterans studying the recordings. Captain Hayes contacted base security and provided them with Marcus's employee information, including his home address, emergency contacts, and work schedule. She also reached out to the FBI, as theft of military property fell under federal jurisdiction and carried serious criminal penalties. The investigation was now officially underway, but Hayes wanted to handle the confrontation carefully to avoid spooking Marcus into running before they could gather more evidence. The decision was made to monitor Marcus during his next scheduled shift while building a stronger case against him. Plainclothes security personnel would observe his behavior, and additional cameras would be temporarily installed to cover the blind spots near the display cases. If Marcus attempted another theft, they would catch him in the act with irrefutable evidence. Rodriguez volunteered to help with the surveillance operation. The theft of military decorations felt like a personal attack to him, and he wanted to ensure that justice was served. These medals represented brothers and sisters in arms who had bled and died for their country, and seeing them treated as mere commodities to be stolen and sold filled him with a righteous anger that burned steady and cold. As they prepared their trap, both Hayes and Rodriguez reflected on how violations of trust like this one damaged the entire military community. The Armory was meant to be a place where service members' sacrifices were honored and remembered, not a target for petty criminals looking to make a quick profit. They were determined to ensure that Marcus Thompson would face the full consequences of his actions. Marcus had no idea that his crimes had been discovered or that military investigators were building a case against him. He continued his evening shifts, growing bolder with each passing day. His third theft was already being planned, targeting a Bronze Star that he had researched extensively and found a buyer for online. In his mind, he had perfected a foolproof system for stealing and selling military decorations without getting caught. The collision course between Predator and Justice was set, with Marcus's next scheduled shift serving as the likely moment when his criminal enterprise would come crashing down around him. Marcus arrived for his Thursday evening shift completely unaware that multiple sets of eyes were watching his every move. Hidden cameras had been installed in the memorial corridor, and Sergeant Rodriguez sat in an unmarked van outside the Armory, coordinating with Captain Hayes and 2 federal investigators who had taken positions inside the building. The evening started normally, with Marcus following his usual routine of emptying trash bins and mopping floors in the administrative wing. But the federal agents noticed his nervous energy immediately. He kept checking his phone, wiping sweat from his forehead despite the cool building temperature, and glancing repeatedly toward the memorial corridor where the display cases waited. Around 9:30, Marcus made his move. The new surveillance equipment captured everything in crystal-clear detail as he approached the display case containing the bronze star he had been planning to steal. His hands trembled as he pulled out his screwdriver and worked to open the case, unaware that federal investigators were recording every second of his crime. The moment Marcus's hand closed around the bronze star, Captain Hayes gave the signal. Federal agents emerged from their hiding positions, while Sergeant Rodriguez entered through the main entrance, his combat boots echoing down the hallway like approaching thunder. Marcus spun around to find himself surrounded, the stolen medal still clutched in his trembling fist. The confrontation was swift and decisive. Marcus's face went white as he realized the full scope of his situation. The federal agents identified themselves and informed him that he was under arrest for theft of government property, a felony that carried significant prison time. His legs nearly gave out as the handcuffs clicked into place, the sound seeming to seal his fate with metallic finality. In the security office, Marcus was read his rights while investigators photographed the bronze star and bagged it as evidence. The weight of his situation began to sink in as Agent Sarah Chen, the lead federal investigator, explained the charges he would be facing. Theft of military property was a federal offense that could result in years in prison and massive fines, especially for repeat offenses. Agent Chen had been investigating military property theft for over a decade and had seen cases like this before. Young men and women, often struggling financially, would target military installations for quick cash without fully understanding the legal consequences. But Marcus's case was different. The systematic nature of his thefts and his clear planning showed deliberation that would work against him in court. The interrogation began with Marcus initially denying everything despite being caught red-handed. He claimed he was just cleaning the case and had no intention of stealing anything, but the surveillance footage and his possession of lock-picking tools told a different story. Agent Chen methodically presented evidence that demolished each of his excuses, backing him into a corner with facts he couldn't dispute. Faced with overwhelming evidence, Marcus finally broke down and confessed to all 3 thefts. Through tears, he explained his financial desperation, his mother's medical bills, and his fear of homelessness. While Agent Chen sympathized with his struggles, she made it clear that financial hardship didn't justify stealing symbols of military sacrifice and honor. The confession revealed the full extent of Marcus's operation, including the names of collectors who had purchased the stolen medals and details about the online networks he had used to facilitate the sales. This information would help investigators track down the missing decorations and potentially uncover other theft rings operating in similar ways. Sergeant Rodriguez was allowed to observe the interrogation, and his presence seemed to have a profound effect on Marcus. When Rodriguez finally spoke, his voice carried the weight of personal experience and moral authority. He explained what each stolen medal meant, describing the courage and sacrifice required to earn such decorations, and the families who treasured them as symbols of their loved ones' service. The veteran's words hit Marcus harder than any legal threat could have. For the first time, Marcus seemed to truly understand that his victims weren't just abstract institutions or insurance companies. They were real people who had served their country and whose honors he had treated as commodities. The shame in his eyes was unmistakable as the full moral weight of his actions crashed down on him. Agent Chen explained the next steps in the legal process. Marcus would be formally charged within 48 hours, and his case would likely proceed to federal court within 60 days. The stolen medals would need to be recovered from their buyers, and Marcus would be required to provide full cooperation in tracking them down. His bail would be set high due to the federal nature of the charges and his demonstrated pattern of theft. As Marcus was led away in handcuffs, Sergeant Rodriguez felt a mixture of satisfaction and sadness. Justice was being served, but the violation of trust and honor that had brought them to this moment left a bitter taste. The stolen medals would eventually be returned to their rightful places, but the damage to the sanctity of the memorial displays couldn't be so easily repaired. The arrest made local news the following day, sending shockwaves through the military community, and serving as a stark reminder that even sacred symbols of service and sacrifice weren't immune to criminal exploitation. The federal courthouse in downtown Phoenix had seen countless criminals pass through its doors, but Marcus Thompson's case carried a particular weight that seemed to permeate the entire building. As he sat in the defendant's chair, wearing an ill-fitting borrowed suit, Marcus couldn't stop thinking about how drastically his life had changed in just 3 weeks since his arrest. The media attention had been intense and unforgiving. Local news stations had run the story multiple times, with headlines like "Janitor Steals Heroes Medals" and "Sacred Military Honor Stolen by Trusted Employee." Marcus's photograph had appeared on television and in newspapers, making him instantly recognizable around Phoenix and destroying any hope he had of finding employment after this ordeal ended. His court-appointed attorney, David Brennan, was a competent public defender who had handled dozens of federal theft cases. But even Brennan admitted that Marcus's situation was particularly challenging. The systematic nature of the thefts, combined with the symbolic importance of military decorations, made this case politically sensitive and personally offensive to many potential jurors who might have military connections. The prosecution, led by Assistant U.S. Attorney Maria Santos, had built an airtight case. The surveillance footage showing Marcus in the act of theft was devastating evidence that left little room for defense arguments. Santos had also tracked down the stolen medals through the cryptocurrency transactions and online communications, recovering all 3 decorations and identifying the collectors who had unknowingly purchased stolen military property. During the investigation, federal agents had discovered that Marcus wasn't an isolated case. The collectors he had sold to were part of a larger network that dealt in questionable military memorabilia, including items that had been stolen from museums, estate sales, and private collections across the country. Marcus's case had opened a door that led to multiple ongoing federal investigations into military property theft rings. The preliminary hearing had been particularly difficult for Marcus to endure. Sergeant Rodriguez testified about the significance of each stolen medal, describing the battles where they had been earned, and the families who had donated them to the Armory's memorial display. His testimony was emotional and powerful, reducing several observers in the courtroom to tears and highlighting the deeply personal nature of Marcus's crimes. Marcus's mother, Elena, had attended every court hearing despite her ongoing health problems. The stress of her son's arrest and the public shame that followed had worsened her condition significantly, requiring additional medical treatments that pushed the family deeper into debt. She sat in the gallery, her face a mixture of disappointment and unwavering maternal love, clutching a tissue that never seemed to leave her hands. The financial investigation had revealed the full scope of Marcus's desperation. His debts totaled nearly $40,000 when medical bills, back rent, and credit card obligations were combined. The $1,800 he had received from selling the stolen medals had barely made a dent in what he owed, making his crime seem even more futile and short-sighted. Agent Chen had recommended that Marcus cooperate fully with ongoing investigations into the military memorabilia black market. His willingness to provide information about buyers, websites, and communication methods had helped federal agents identify other potential theft cases and track down additional stolen items. This cooperation would factor into his eventual sentence, but it also meant accepting responsibility for enabling a broader criminal enterprise. The psychological evaluation ordered by the court had painted a picture of a man overwhelmed by circumstances, beyond his control, but not suffering from any mental illness that might excuse his behavior. Dr. Rachel Morrison, the forensic psychologist who examined Marcus, described him as someone who had made desperate choices driven by financial panic rather than inherent criminality or disrespect for military service. Marcus's former girlfriend, Sarah, had been contacted by investigators and asked about his behavior in the months leading up to his arrest. Her testimony revealed a pattern of increasing anxiety and desperate behavior that she now recognized as warning signs she had missed at the time. She expressed regret for leaving him when he needed support most, but also acknowledged that his criminal behavior had vindicated her decision to distance herself from his problems. The Armory had implemented new security measures in response to Marcus's thefts. Additional cameras covered all blind spots, Display cases had been upgraded with more secure locks, and background checks for janitorial staff had been strengthened. Sergeant Rodriguez had been asked to develop new protocols for monitoring and protecting military memorabilia, turning his volunteer work into a more formal security consultant role. Local veterans organizations had rallied around the armory, offering support and expressing outrage at the violation of military honors. Several groups had organized fundraisers to improve security at military installations across Arizona, and Marcus's case had become a rallying cry for better protection of military heritage sites and memorial displays. As Marcus awaited sentencing, he received letters from dozens of veterans expressing their feelings about his crimes. Some were filled with anger and condemnation, while others offered forgiveness and urged him to learn from his mistakes. The letters forced him to confront the human cost of his actions in ways that legal proceedings alone couldn't accomplish, personalizing the abstract concept of military honor that he had violated. The morning of sentencing arrived with an unexpected visitor waiting in the courthouse lobby. Master Sergeant James Patterson, a decorated Vietnam veteran, had traveled from Tucson specifically to attend Marcus's hearing. At 72 years old, Patterson carried himself with the dignity of someone who had faced death and emerged stronger, his presence commanding respect from everyone in the building. Patterson had earned 3 of the medals that Marcus had stolen during his own military service decades earlier. When he heard about the case through veteran networks, he felt compelled to witness justice firsthand. But as he observed Marcus throughout the proceedings, something unexpected happened. The old soldier began to see past the crime to the broken young man underneath. Judge Rebecca Martinez had a reputation for fair but firm sentencing in federal cases. She had reviewed Marcus's file extensively, considering not just the crimes themselves but the circumstances that led to them and his cooperation with ongoing investigations. The courtroom fell silent as she prepared to deliver her judgment, the weight of her decision affecting not just Marcus but everyone who had been touched by his actions. Marcus stood to receive his sentence with his hands clasped behind his back, trying to project strength he didn't feel. His attorney had prepared him for the possibility of 18 months in federal prison, but the uncertainty was agonizing. His mother sat in the front row, her breathing labored from anxiety and her chronic health condition. Judge Martinez began by acknowledging the seriousness of Marcus's crimes and their impact on the military community. She spoke about the sanctity of military honors and the trust that had been violated when Marcus chose theft over seeking legitimate help for his problems. Her words were measured but carried the weight of moral authority that filled the courtroom. But then something unexpected happened. Master Sergeant Patterson stood up and asked permission to address the court. Judge Martinez, recognizing his military bearing and the significance of his presence, allowed him to speak. Patterson's voice was clear and strong as he talked about second chances and the redemptive power of service to others. The veteran proposed an alternative form of justice that caught everyone by surprise. Instead of simply serving prison time, Patterson suggested that Marcus be sentenced to community service specifically focused on caring for elderly veterans in VA hospitals and assisted living facilities. The work would be supervised, unpaid, and would expose Marcus daily to the real people whose service had earned the medals he had stolen. Patterson's proposal resonated with Judge Martinez, who had been struggling with how to balance punishment with rehabilitation in Marcus's case. After a brief recess to consider this unusual suggestion, she returned with a creative sentence that incorporated elements of Patterson's idea while ensuring that justice was still served. Marcus was sentenced to 14 months in federal prison, followed by 3 years of supervised probation, during which he would be required to complete 2,000 hours of community service at VA facilities. Additionally, he would pay full restitution for the investigation costs and participate in financial counseling to address the underlying issues that had led to his criminal behavior. The sentence was both punishment and opportunity, prison time to reflect on his actions, followed by years of service that would help him understand the true meaning of the medals he had stolen. Master Sergeant Patterson volunteered to oversee Marcus's community service placement, ensuring that his work would be meaningful and educational, rather than simply punitive. Marcus's transformation began even before he entered prison. The reality of his situation had forced him to confront aspects of his character that he had never examined before. The desperation that had driven him to theft was replaced by a determination to emerge from this experience as a better person who could contribute positively to the community he had wronged. During his incarceration, Marcus participated in every educational and counseling program available. He studied military history, learning about the battles and campaigns where the medals he had stolen were earned. This knowledge gave him a deeper appreciation for military sacrifice and helped him understand why his crimes had been so personally offensive to veterans and their families. Upon his release, Marcus began his community service at a VA hospital in Phoenix, working under Master Sergeant Patterson's guidance. The work was physically and emotionally demanding, helping disabled veterans with daily tasks, listening to their stories, and witnessing firsthand the long-term costs of military service. Each day brought new understanding of what military honor really meant. The veterans Marcus served had initially been skeptical of the young man who had stolen military decorations, but his genuine remorse and dedicated service gradually won over even his harshest critics. They shared stories of their service, their struggles with civilian life, and their pride in the medals and ribbons that Marcus had once seen as mere commodities. 3 years later, Marcus had completed his community service and transformed his life completely. He had earned his GED while in prison and used his probation period to attend community college, studying to become a counselor specializing in financial crisis intervention. His personal experience with desperation and poor choices gave him unique insight into helping others avoid similar mistakes. Master Sergeant Patterson had become an unexpected mentor and friend, guiding Marcus through his rehabilitation and helping him understand that redemption was possible even after serious moral failures. Their relationship proved that justice could be both punitive and restorative, healing wounds while preventing future crimes. Marcus eventually returned to the armory where his crimes had been committed, but this time as a volunteer working alongside Sergeant Rodriguez to improve security and educate visitors about military history. Standing before the same display cases he had once violated, Marcus felt profound gratitude for the second chance he had been given and the lessons he had learned about honor, service, and the true cost of desperate choices.